120 people have died and hundreds more are still missing after the worst flooding in parts of Western Europe for several decades.
There's not zero pollution. You know, the Chinese just announced today, I believe it was today, they're building 150 new nuclear reactors. And how is that not good for planetary stability? You talk about the environment. How about not a third world war?
I don't think we're currently doomed.
The best way to save the planet is to make poor people rich as fast as we possibly can. So that means we can have our cake and eat it too, and isn't that absolutely lovely? And the biggest environmental issue that's facing us isn't global warming, it's overfishing in the oceans, as far as I'm concerned, because that we could actually stop. It's actually extremely damaging, and we know how to stop it. And Trudeau, to his credit, by the way, has produced a series of marine protected areas along Canada's coastline that weren't there before. Now, I don't know how protected they are and how thorough that legislation is, but that's something that he's done that actually counts as a credible accomplishment in my estimation. There's not zero pollution. So net zero, it's an empty talking point to put up a flag that you're on the right side. It's not differentiated, careful, thoughtful, thorough, detail-oriented thinking at the level that will actually produce solutions. And there's no discussion about, like, what are we aiming at here? Well, how about copious energy for everyone, as clean as possible? But in that order, copious energy for everyone, lowest possible price, resilient, stable systems. And to their credit, the Democrats and their infrastructure bill are building resilience goals in relationship to the power grid, and that's necessary because we should be stress testing those systems constantly. But if you're on the left and you care about poor people, the only thing you should really care about is cheap energy. And why is that? Let's be very precise about this. Okay, what makes people prosperous and secure? Work. What is work? It is the expenditure of energy. What is energy? Work. What is work? Wealth. You want to deal with absolute poverty, or even relative poverty for that matter. Energy is everything. And here's another fact. So, you Americans have actually knocked your carbon dioxide output down 14% in the last couple of decades. You know why? Fracking. Because it made natural gas cheap and replaced dirtier forms of energy. Plus, it made you way less reliant on OPEC and the Russians. And how is that not good for planetary stability? You talk about the environment. How about not a third world war? Because that's not so good for the environment. And so fracking knocked carbon dioxide output in the US down 14%. Who would have predicted that? And in Schellenberger's book, Apocalypse Never, he interviewed an MIT scientist, and he said, you really want to knock carbon dioxide output down? Make India and China, but India, he was speaking of more particularly, switch to coal as fast as possible. You think, coal? Why? Oh, it's better than wood. And we know the pattern. Wood, that's not so good. You cut down trees, you cut down forests, it's really polluting, especially indoors, and that kills a lot of people, stunts a lot of children's growth, growth in the broad sense, because indoor pollution is much more deadly than outdoor pollution, generally speaking. So, and wood, well, you have to cut down forests, it's inefficient, it puts particulates in the atmosphere as well. So you switch to coal. Coal's better. It's not wood to begin with. And then it's nowhere near as polluting, and coal technologies have got quite clean. Now you still have to mine the coal, and there's an environmental cost for that. But then you switch from coal to natural gas. Natural gas is pretty damn good. There's lots of it, it's plentiful, it's clean. And then maybe, if we can get our act together and have some sense, we could switch from natural gas to fission. Well, and then we could have energy for everyone at the lowest possible cost. And then what happens? Well, people get rich, and then what happens? They care about the environment. So how is that not the right solution to, let's not call it climate change, because that's annoying. It's like, let's not produce any more waste than we have to while we try to live. Fair enough, that's a reasonable goal. But all I see coming out of these COP26 conferences, sort of thing is, here's a bunch of people doing it wrong and let's stop them. It's like, yeah, right, guys. Why don't you try to do something instead? I happen to also believe firmly that global and even national attempts to deal with climate change are going to cause way more trouble than accumulated carbon dioxide. Not because accumulated carbon dioxide isn't somewhat of a threat, but when it becomes a global planetary threat that's a crisis, then it's a justification for virtually any political action. So look out, man, because because of the dangers of system. Well, as long as it's for health and safety, it's always good. And, not to get conspiratorial here, but the same damn thing is going to happen with the climate change push.
Absolutely.
They're already it's already being reconfigured as, it's the biggest public health issue of our time. It's like, no, I don't think so. I think overreaching bureaucrats are the biggest health, what would you say, the biggest challenge to our health of our time. So, and I think that's especially true of the COP26 bunch. The Chinese just announced today, I believe it was today, they're building 150 new nuclear reactors. Like not one, 150. And we can't get our act together in the States, and Canada for that matter, to build like one. And in California, they're going to shut, 10% of the power there down? It's like, no nuclear. Well, what are we going to replace it with? Wind. Yeah, well, only if we put windmills in front of the politicians pushing for wind. Can you imagine how much wind it would take to blow your car down the road? And so if those people at the climate change summit were serious, what they would be, and we could be very, very specific about this. Here's what you do if you're a leftist who's concerned about the environment and the poor simultaneously. Okay? You make power, energy, as cheap as possible for everyone, because there's no difference between energy and wealth, and because rich people can't hoard energy. It's not a Pareto problem, right? Because all the energy doesn't end up in the hands of a few. So you try to build nuclear reactors, perhaps, there's a bit of a problem getting rid of the waste. And there's a lot of bureaucratic wrangling around that. It's not a solved problem entirely, but we don't have a better option than nuclear in the long run. And so you make power as cheap as possible. So if you want to save the climate, you want to make power everywhere in the world as cheap as possible, as fast as possible, to make people as rich as possible, because the richer they get, the more they care about the environment. And that pattern is clear in China and India, which have greened substantially in the last 20 years. Those two countries have greened an area the size of the Amazon in the last 20 years. And that's in addition, by the way, just so everyone knows. Here's a cool little fact. You know that as carbon dioxide levels rise, plants can grow in drier environments? Drier environments. Semi-arid, like deserts, like the sandbanks on oceans and lakes, stabilizing that as well. And so because the carbon dioxide levels have risen, the plants can close their pores, the breathing pores, and so they don't evaporate water as much. And so an area the size of Alaska has greened in the last couple of decades, in addition to what China and India have planted.